Welcome to the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee. We have Ventum Bikes and TrainerRoad's Ivy Drain. We also have Hannah Otto with us. Hannah from Pivot Cycles, DT Swiss. Good to have you. Excited. Yeah. We are going to get into a lot of different stuff that you have sent in this week. First of all, happy Thanksgiving. If you're listening to this live, it's being published on Thanksgiving Day. So for those of you in the United States, hopefully you're having a good time.
Wait,
Let's
favorite
talk.
Thanksgiving dish, main or side? Hannah.
Sweet potatoes.
Ooh. Do you put marshmallows on yours?
Yeah.
I think that's like a what?
Oh.
Yes.
No. Oh, no. No. Comment below if that's disgusting and if you just threw up in your mouth a little bit, because I did.
That's like almost as controversial as pineapple on pizza.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
yeah.
It's so good. And then like broil it a little bit and the marshmallows get a little like crunchy, crispy. Oh, so good.
Oh yeah.
All right. So my favorite thing with Thanksgiving is pie. Like,
What kind?
Of course, then
Pumpkin?
cherry pie.
Cherry.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's not
that is
Thanksgiving.
really off the wall.
Anything can be Thanksgiving if you wish it to be. All right, Ivy. There's no rules here. So, but then in terms of like the main dish stuff, this might gather some hate too. But stuffing,
Stuffing,
That's
that's
my
my
favorite
favorite
part.
for sure.
Yeah,
Stuffing.
Yeah.
stuffing with
Valid.
gravy. My gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's the best. So, anyways, good question, Ivy. I like
Thanks,
that. That's good. Let us know what your favorite Thanksgiving item is.
Just trying to
down
stir
below.
the pot, you know? and it's
YouTube
good.
algorithm's just going to be like, what is this video about? Mashed potatoes, gravy. Okay, Hannah, I want to talk to you about Lifetime Grand Prix. We're going to get some learnings about this stuff. We're going to talk about a race that you have coming up next year. We're going to get into the questions that you all submitted at trainerroad.com/podcast. And today we're going to talk about a lot of fun questions. It's going to be great. Okay, so looking back at a very long season of racing, Hannah, that might be relatable to some people in this, where you raced maybe your first race in March and then you raced your last race just recently. It's a long season. What are your learnings from this past year of racing the Lifetime Grand Prix?
Yeah. I mean, that's a massive question. I started racing in the beginning of February, and my last race will be December 2nd. So it's a massively long season for me. I'll have raced more than 25 times. And that's not like locally racing 25 times. So that's all over quite literally the world. So it's a lot of travel and a lot of different starts for me as well. I raced everything from 20 minutes to 8 hours. So it was a really...
Hannah's got
I mean,
business class status with United. She's in the United Lounge, baby.
Yeah.
She's got points.
it was a wildly diverse season, and I've carried that load the last 2 years, and I've had really solid results. And so I think I'm happy with how things went. I won a Marathon World Cup. Things were great. But I think for me now, I've reached a point where I don't want good. I want exceptional. And looking back on the year, it is really hard to carry that load. And anyone who listens to this podcast definitely understands the conversation around physiology and what type of training it takes to race 20 minutes versus 8 hours. And even the thought process that goes into those races with fueling and different body types, different equipment. It's a lot of things to constantly be switching, a lot of cognitive load. So looking back on the season, I'm very happy with it, but I'm also scheming. I'm also looking ahead, understanding, I only did 5 of the 7 Grand Prix races. There was no room for error. And that definitely
because they
caught
give you
up to
2
me.
drop races,
Yes.
right? And that's why there's no room for error, because all of your results counted and you
Yep.
didn't have any results you could throw out at the end of the year.
Yep. And that started at Sea Otter when I had a major mechanical issue and someone actually stopped to help me. And they're like, ooh, this is bad. I would just count this as your drop. And I remembered standing there being like, okay,
Oh, no.
excuse me, sir, you don't know my calendar. This cannot be a drop. Yeah, I mean, I think I've done well with what I've had, and I'm super happy with that, but I'm definitely in search of more. And so I guess if we cut ahead to that next question, that leaves me
Yeah.
looking at what does 2024 mean? And I haven't talked about this a lot yet, but I'm super excited about it, is I'm going to focus on endurance events next year. I'm going to focus on the Lifetime Grand Prix and Marathon World Cups. And
Nice.
I've never trained for the long events. My focus has always been XCOs, and I've always trained for those and then just showed up to the long ones. Yet I've found a lot of success in those long ones. I think that really tells me a little bit about my physiology and where my natural ability might lie. And now I want to explore that and see what happens when I really put my best foot forward.
So, Hannah, your background in triathlon, what sort of triathlon did you do? Was it like sprint and Olympic distance, or were you doing long course stuff?
Yeah, mostly sprint and Olympic, and then Xterra, which is mostly Olympic distance, but obviously a little bit different.
A sprint and Olympic, it's still not an XCO race. Like a sprint is,
Correct.
right? So I guess like your background has always been on the longer side of like XCO and certainly short track. So this is exciting. Kind of makes sense.
Anna, what
Yeah.
kind of endurance you talking about here? Like Tour Divide 2024?
No,
Okay, cool.
Unbound XL.
No.
I mean, you would crush that.
The Lifetime Grand Prix and then Marathon World Cups. I want to give myself the best shot at the Grand Prix this year. So instead of 5 out of 7, I would like to give myself those buffer races, actually train for those races rather than just showing up and hoping for the best.
Mhm.
And then the Marathon World Cups. After winning that World Cup in snowshoe, it definitely got me excited and motivated around that series. For me, a lot of sport is about that personal journey and how far I can challenge and push myself personally. And so I want to see what that means. Where do I stand on the international level? Where do I stand against, in theory, the best in the world? And so I'm really excited to line up for those World Cups. And to go a step further, a massive goal of mine would definitely be the Marathon World Championship in snowshoe this year, having won that course last year and now lining up for the World Championship there this year. I have big expectations, and that will definitely be an A race of mine.
Hmm.
Can we talk about the business side of racing a little bit too? Like which series is more financially rewarding for you? I know that World Cups, like cross country World Cups, they garner a lot of attention, but it seems like you actually might be able to make a better living as an athlete doing Lifetime Grand Prix style races. Is that correct, Hannah?
I mean, it's a tough question because I think as a cyclist, most of your money will come from sponsors, ideally. Ideally, you're not relying on the winnings because in cycling, the winnings are few and far between. Even when it's a good payout from a race, it's still not likely all that you want to make in a year. It's not like golf where you're getting a check with, 5 zeros behind it. For a single event, right? And so, yes, the Lifetime Grand Prix definitely has larger payouts, but it all depends about what your sponsors are excited about and where they want to see you represent them. And so I think it can vary from athlete to athlete. I also think that for me, and this is where everyone's different, is for me, the financial piece is obviously very important because this is what I do for a living. This is my primary source of income. But you also have to step back and say, what do you want to get out of the sport? And I think that is a piece for me of where the Marathon World Cups come in, is I want to race on the world stage. And that's an important fulfillment piece for me. And so I'll continue to do that.
I feel like that's a unique thing about this sport is it's kind of up to you to form the narrative. Is that right? In the sense that when you're seeking sponsorship, it's like, here's the story, here's how I'm going to get you views, here's how it goes, rather than saying like, I'm going to be competing at the PGA Tour Championship. And since I'm competing at that, like there's going to be a lot of exposure and you just want to sponsor an athlete that does that. Instead, it's up to you to tell that story. So your story's changed this year in the sense that you're not
Yes.
going for everything. It's super focused.
Yeah, and I think largely people have been really excited about that. I was very nervous to shift that narrative, but I think the people who know me well and know what I've been balancing, they really believe in me when I make that focus and understanding that I have been balancing more than most. And so with that focus, I think will come really good results. At least that's the plan and the hope.
Cool. Well, hopefully that helps somebody that's listening to this because we have a lot of younger athletes that ask about sponsorship and that sort of thing. And they wonder how an athlete like Hannah just like hits the gravy train and just how everything's all set and laid out. And I think that it's not quite that simple. And it's up to Hannah to put all that together every year. Okay. So 2024, are you going to be doing more endurance events? And next week, I think it is. Is that right? Or in a couple weeks, you're going to be doing La Ruta.
Yeah, it's November 30th to December 2nd. It's a 3-day stage race.
And that's down in Costa Rica, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, it'll go from the East Coast at the Caribbean to the West Coast at the Pacific for 3 days. You'll cross Costa Rica.
I've had a friend that has done this before, and he was going through this race is famous for being like wild.
Yeah.
And at one point he was going through a river and there was a gigantic python. And sure enough, there was a photographer there. And there's a picture of Trevor walking through a river with a bike above his head. And there's a python. And you can see the python over there.
Oh my
Yikes.
gosh.
Pretty wild. So hopefully
just
no
love-
pythons
yeah.
for you, Hannah.
I am so pumped for this race. Like, this has been a bucket list race for me for a long time, but it's such a big race. And when I say it's been a bucket list race for me for a long time, when I was 14, I was looking at this race like, oh my gosh, that looks so amazing. But at that age, you're definitely not prepared for something of this
Yeah.
level. So I've been waiting a long time until 1, it fit the calendar, and 2, I felt like I was at a physical place and a mental place. I mean, gosh, we could talk about the mental aspect of this race forever because of all of those things, including going to another country and racing through their lens and in their environment. But yeah, I'm so pumped. This is, like I said, a bucket list race for me. I've been waiting to do it. I'm a professional athlete. I have expectations of myself for results, but a big piece of this is just fulfilling that part of me that loves the adventure. And I feel like it's really going to fulfill everything I love about bike racing, which is seeing new places, seeing new environments, seeing where my bike takes me, and seeing how far I can push my body. To me, this race just seems to encapsulate all of that. And so yeah, I'm just so pumped.
well, that makes more sense now because when you said this, I was like, damn, Hannah, you've been racing for like a year, like a calendar year. Like, will you take a break? It makes more sense now hearing that because I would be surprised if you added another race on your calendar just because, But-
Yeah, definitely. This was a fully me thing. It's funny. Like, Clayton and I were just sitting on the couch one day and I was like, yeah, what are those races that I haven't done yet that I still have, just purely as I want to check off as doing them. Not like, I have 1,000,001 races that I want to win, but what are the races? And he's like, I don't know, Laruda, like, why don't you just go do that one? And I was like, oh,
supportive
challenge
king
accepted. And like a week later, I had signed up and he's like, what have I done? But we're super excited. We're going to vacation there for 5 days after as like an end of season reward too. So it's going to be amazing.
That's great.
You're going to be racing through jungles, up volcanoes, down volcanoes, through mud. It's going to be like the most wild experience. And we're going to have you on after Laruda too. And then you're going to be able to share your experience, which will be really fun. So
yeah,
Yes,
good luck.
a race.
Can't wait to hear about
I've
it.
always wanted to do this race too. So I'm like excited to live it vicariously through you. It'll be really cool.
Yeah. And hopefully we can get you there maybe in 2025.
Oh boy. Yeah. I think that we'd have to have a sitter so then my wife could come but she would just have to stay on a beach, like at a resort or something. So I can't,
Yeah.
I can't drag her through the jungle with me. She would not like that. So, 2024 really quick. I want to talk about that. So, Ivy, I don't know if you've laid out your plans for 2024, what you're looking at. You raced a block of cyclocross races now. Do you want to do just a pass because you haven't thought about it yet, or what are your plans for the next year?
Yeah, I will still do some UCI cross races, of course. Like, I love cyclocross. Local races are more available to me now in the Bay Area in California. And I feel like there's more road stuff that I can incorporate too. Like, I really miss racing road. And it was, of course, one of my strengths. So I kind of want to do some of that too. I want to do more XC stuff. Like, I don't know. I'm just going to kind of figure it out as I go. But I'm going to keep in mind trying to prioritize races locally and outside of my own region, I feel like I really spent a lot of money and energy going to races that I just don't like. And
Mm,
I do get some financial support from sponsors, which is amazing and helps me get to events. But that runs out, like Hannah can speak to this, like that runs out really quickly. Traveling to races is so expensive. Not even just the flight, like rental cars and making sure you have a big enough rental car for all of your bikes. And Airbnbs are not cheap and hotels aren't cheap. And it's so much more than just the race registration and getting there, you know? So
yeah.
I like traveling to races. I want to keep doing UCI races and I will keep doing them, but I need to prioritize ones that don't feel like such a big lift, like
Mhm.
fiscally, emotionally, like going to a state or a region that I don't really like. I'll do a big financial lift if it's a really cool race and it's going to feed my soul to be there. But I felt like some of these UCI races or races that I was traveling to, I would go through a lot to get there and then get there and be like, ew, this isn't cool. I don't like this, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, when you
So,
step outside of it and you ask yourself, like, man, am I really enjoying this? It's kind of a different thing.
yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people are probably listening to this. If you haven't formed a plan for next year, you're probably starting your training, getting close to that, and you're trying to think of what you want to do for next year. I think it's really good to step back and look at it honestly, like Ivy has. It's a good idea. Ivy, since you're local, we might be at some of the same races. I was planning on going for cross country national championships, and then I started factoring it in, and I was going to spend $6,000 traveling to different races to get qualifying points, then going to nationals. And I was like, who the heck am I kidding? I'm gonna get like a little medal or something, and maybe I might get a medal if like everything goes perfectly. So like,
Mhm.
what am I doing? I can't spend that much money and justify it. So instead, I'm staying locally. I think my target event. I always hesitate to share this because then super fast people go, oh, I want to go there too, and then I get blown out by a bunch of
Yeah.
people. But but because you're all faster than me. But I'm going to Downeyville. I think is going to be my main goal. The Downeyville
Cool.
Classic, super close to us. Ivy, that's close to you. That'd be super fun, just saying. It could be a
Yeah.
good one to do. But doing that, I don't know for sure yet, but I might try to do Xterra. I think, oh gosh, is it like Continental Championships? It's some sort of championship, and it's happening in Alabama. The travel to that is actually a bit more affordable than others. That one might be fun. I've heard it's my friend Eric Lagerstrom has said it's a really, really cool course. He really liked it. So I might end up doing that, or I might just do Xterra Lake Tahoe. But I think that's what I'm going to do. And then I'd really like to do SBT gravel, but I don't know if I'll be able to get in through the lottery and all that stuff and get signed up in time. I don't know, but those would be like my marquee events. So I've got that really nice NV melee that I want to use. I think be good at that race at SBT gravel. Exciting times. Right. Bjorn's question says, I've recently returned to TrainerRoad after trying coaches for the last 3 years, and I'm very happy to be back, especially with all the new updates. What Bjorn's
Yay.
talking about there recently, it's AI FTP detection. You don't have to do tests anymore. It's amazing. How nice would that be to not have to do FTP tests? So AI FTP detection, master's plans. So any plan on TrainerRoad, any cycling training plan has a master's variant. It's capped at 2 days of intensity per week. And that is also spread out so you get as much recovery in between those intense days as possible. I'm 36. I'm solidly on the master's training plan train right now. So yeah, Ivy, go ahead.
Master's training plan is not just for old people, by the way.
Yeah. Yes.
It's for
Thank you, Ivy. I don't feel old.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not just for masters people. It's for people that have full lives and full plates that still want to get
Yes.
faster.
And that's me. Plate's full. So he's talking about that. Also, Plan Builder Custom Duration. It's a new update that we just shipped that allows you to adjust exactly like how long you want to train on specific days of the week. And so it allows you to customize a certain volume of a plan much more to your needs. And there's more updates coming. So that's why Bjorn signed back up. If you're listening to this and you haven't signed up for TrainerRoad, or if you have like stopped paying for TrainerRoad and you've been thinking about it, now's the time. Go sign up. Bjorn says, to my question, I read the forum very regularly, and I'm always surprised to see how many people claim that TrainerRoad burned them out, yet they do less than 80% of the prescribed workouts, typically add in a lot of other training sessions and big rides. When I was trying out coaches over the last 3 years, I had to sign a contract with all 4 coaches that I tried in those times, and the contract stated that if I did not complete 80% of the prescribed trainings, that my contract would be nullified.
That's crazy.
Has TrainerRoad considered adding something like this into the user agreement? If so, why isn't it included? And finally, is there any magic with the 80%? I found it interesting that all 4 coaches had this, but all 4 coaches varied widely in experience and cost, as low as $110 up to $550 per month. So yeah, that's a huge range. compared to $19 a month. Bjorn, it's good to have you back.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about that? I have some thoughts on this, but and I wish Nate was here. He wasn't going to be here. He wasn't able to make it. So he'd have some great thoughts on this too. But what do you think, Ivy?
I've never had a coach in the past or heard of a coach doing this contract. Like in my experience,
Really?
coaches want your money. And if you don't do your workouts, they don't care. No skin off their back. Yeah, you're not improving. Like, it's easy. So I haven't heard of that.
Have you read every detail of your contract? Maybe it's within there because a lot of templated
I haven't signed a
coaching
coaching contract. Every coach that I've had is just like, let me be your coach. And I'm like, cool, man. And that's the
no contract. Okay.
No, not at all.
So
And
if
my
you
other
use, like,
problem
a lot
with
of templates from
my-
like Training Peaks or something else, you can have like a coach's agreement that you can use.
Oh, sure.
You can start with that.
Okay.
And in a lot of agreements, something like this is in place. I shouldn't say a lot, but I know from personal experience, I know of coaches that have this in place. But yeah.
Yeah, it feels kind of like a university being like, if you don't do more than 80% of your assignments, we'll kick you out. It's like, no, you'll just fail the class. It's your fault. Like, we don't care. We'll take your money, I don't know. And then my other problem with Bjorn, or not problem, but question mark about Bjorn's question is that there are coaches as low as $110. I've never heard of a coach in the US charging that little. Yeah, so
Most of them are more than that.
Anyways, apart from the coaching stuff, the main question of 80% of the workouts and people getting burned out on TrainerRoad, which they do talk about on the TrainerRoad forum, I just want to bring up that a lot of new TrainerRoad athletes, when they're picking training plans, they look at their Strava or how many hours per week when they're building their plan on Plan Builder. And they're like, oh, I ride like 10 or 12 hours a week. So I should definitely do high volume because, that's 10 or more hours a week of structured training. And I think the biggest way in which new athletes don't set themselves up for success is thinking that 10 hours of unstructured riding or 10 hours of the riding they have been doing is equitable to 10 hours of structured training with intervals. Like, it's absolutely not. It's such a different tax on your body. So I think people kind of misunderstand that just because you've been riding 10 hours a week doesn't mean you're ready for high volume and 10 hours of structured training. And that's not unique to something like TrainerRoad. I think that'd be unique to if you've got a coach too, and just like told them blindly, like, yeah, I ride 20 hours a week. And the coach would be like, okay, and give you that much structured interval training, you'd get roasted,
Yeah. I was at a coaching clinic just a couple of weeks ago, and there were coaches there talking about how common this issue is with their athletes, just, with doing too much and not really being honest in their feedback, in the sense that, like, nobody wants to fail a workout or tell you that it was extremely hard when it shouldn't have been extremely hard. And when you don't have, like, when that isn't established, that there isn't that transparency in place, and it's really tough. And that's why we trust you, the athlete. You don't have to feel bad. You can just answer those surveys and tell us how it felt. And that can really help stuff. But I see it on both sides though, Ivy, right? It's on some cases, some people do pick too high a volume, but I also see very commonly that they pick a lower volume, and then, like is being talked about from Bjorn here, they just add in a bunch of other stuff. And when you end up looking at it in terms of adherence to what was actually prescribed is really low. So, I mean, I guess it makes sense. How about you, Hannah? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that 80%, it's not this magic number, but I do think it's getting at a bigger problem, which is that if you're not completing at least 80% of the workouts in any training plan, that's the first thing that needs to be addressed. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've picked the wrong plan. I mean, just like Ivy and Jonathan have both commented, it could be that you picked too low of a plan and added. It could be that you picked too high of a plan and couldn't do it. Whatever that is, the biggest thing is, especially in this particular question, if you're working with the coach and they're setting this 80% rule, what I would imagine is it's because if an athlete comes to a coach and is only completing 70% of the workouts and says any of the questions, why am I not getting faster? Why are my starts slow? Why am I not at my body composition that I want? Anything. The first thing that has to be addressed is you're not completing the plan, because until you hit that compliance aspect, we don't know what else we need to fix. It's sort of a hierarchy, is we can't address any of these extracurricular things until you address the most glaring issue. I think that for a coach, it can start to feel like a broken record on a phone call saying, well, we haven't had the compliance that we need. And I think the same thing applies to anyone looking at their TrainerRoad calendar saying, well, why do I feel burnout? Or why am I not getting faster? Well, I think this question is the perfect chance to have a heart to heart and say, you need to honestly look. And if you're not completing 80% of the rides, That's okay, but that is the number one first thing to address. And until you can get there, I wouldn't stress yourself out about trying to get into the intricacies. A lot of people try and hit that 1% before they're doing the 99. And a lot of the time, it's the simplest thing that makes the biggest difference.
Great advice, Hannah. Yeah. And I mean, we haven't implemented something like this because I think that for us, our goal isn't to drop an athlete if they can't hit the 80%. Our goal is to give athletes the tools and everything else to be able to get to that point, right? So that's why we haven't implemented it. Number, I've heard of varying compliance rates, but 80% is typically with very highly paid, high-end coaches with like high expectations on their athletes. And that's like, you're trying to curate a list of successful athletes. So you don't want somebody to follow 50% of it and then be like, oh, well, that person trained with them and they had terrible results or something. Right. So I assume that that's why some coaches might put something like that in there. But boy, is it a good principle to just personally follow, like what Hannah said. I think it's a really important thing. We talk about consistency a lot and we'll keep doing it. And I know that some people are like, you always talk about consistency. And it's because it's the 99% of what matters, like what Hannah said. And that's really why we'll do it there. But this is not something that's unique as you found, Bjorn, with training with coaches and training with everything else. This isn't something that's unique to TrainerRoad. The concept of burnout or the concept of underperforming is just inherent to athletes training and following a plan and figuring out the best way to be able to do it. That's training. That's what it is there. So it's an interesting thing. I don't think that we'll be instituting any 80% rule and then booting you out or putting like a red flag on your account or something if you aren't 80% compliant. We won't be doing that. Instead, find ways to do it. You can always change your plan volume. You can change up the style of the workouts. If you find that they're difficult to follow, maybe try switching to a master's plan, shorten the durations, use workout alternates, do all those little things. And if you can do that, then it really helps. So
Well, and I think a lot of the time people think for this question in particular, I'm not hitting the 80%. I'm pushing, but I just can't do it. Make Tuesday your off day. It doesn't have to be you stretching your life so thin or you waking up at 4 a.m. every single day. If it's not working, just change it. I think a big thing that we're not saying here is we're not saying that you have to hit 80% of X plan. We're saying that you need to pick the plan that allows you to hit 80%. I think that's really important to hear.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick says, first, glad to hear CEO Nate's voice again on the pod. You were going to hear it today, but he wasn't able to make it. So the episodes are always better with him on, like many TrainerRoad users.
Oh, really?
So,
Nick, picking favorites,
Nick,
huh?
We'll just,
okay.
Yeah.
I know you didn't mean that as a slight. Yeah.
Like, we can get more controversial on here to try and pick up Nate's slack.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, yeah. Expose some company's secrets. Like, what can we do here?
Some sunglasses in, some cool hair, right? Like many TrainerRoad users, I found the podcast and listening turned me into a TrainerRoad user. So thanks. And typically we try to call them athletes, by the way, all of you that are listening to this, to not call you users. Users just feels very like cold and stuff. And so we call you athlete. So if you ever hear us say like TrainerRoad athletes, we aren't talking about some sort of like sponsored, exemplar. It's all of us. Like we're TrainerRoad athletes. So thank you, Nick, for signing up. And I'm super glad that the podcast helped. If you're listening to this podcast right now, give it a thumbs up on YouTube or rate it on Spotify. The more ratings we get every week, it will make it pop up higher. And then more people like Nick will find it. That allows us to build more features. We don't have investors. We're not like other big companies in our space. So you are our investors. When you sign up with us, that allows us to build more. So please do it. It'd be awesome. Thanks to the training I did last year, I took almost 2 minutes off my 20K TT time this past year. That is awesome. Way to go. I have a question about AI FTP detection. The app permits new detections every 28 days, but if my goal is to increase time to exhaustion, aren't I just better off waiting longer between FTP changes so that I can sustain that power longer? And is that the general point of the progression levels? Can I address that one really quickly, like specifically, Ivy? So that's why when you get into the specialty phase, we don't give you AI FTP detections. If you get to the point like you're doing an hour at threshold and it ain't no thing, it's going to recognize that, or, before that, it'll recognize it and it'll give you a slight bump in FTP. But that's one of the main reasons we have this thing in specialty phase where it doesn't give you those AI FTP detections. So then you do extend your time in zone. So for that very reason, that's why we've engineered that into it, Nick.
Right. And also, so specifically for someone like Nick that's trying to focus on and wants to develop this very specific kind of fitness, I think the last thing you should be doing is fixating on and trying to build upon this sole metric of FTP as your performance metric and in comparison to time till exhaustion. I feel like I see a lot of athletes do that and just focus on like, I want my FTP to be higher. And they're not focusing on things like repeatability or the specific kinds of fitness that come with the kind of racing that you want to do. And it's just one measure of such a huge scope of things we can measure in your fitness. And for you as a like TT athlete, yes, your FTP is a representation of the work you've been doing, but to fixate specifically on that number, it's not a one-to-one correlation of how you're going to perform on race day. And it's not one-to-one representation of your fitness in terms of time to exhaustion. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think that's what
You're
Nick is
also-
saying here, right? Is in the sense that like I don't want to raise my FTP in that specialty phase. Like I want to focus on time to exhaustion because that's more important for me.
But you're also going to run into issues with this because let's see if I can articulate this well. If you are trying to hold sweet spot for a long duration and your FTP increases, but you're still holding that same number that was sweet spot, that might now be your tempo effort. And so while yes, you've improved because you're holding that number for a longer time, you're selling yourself short because you aren't working in the zone that you're capable of. And so you're not improving the way that you could be. It's so much better for you to continue to push that ceiling than to just feel better in those workouts because you're working at now a lower percentage of your FTP.
And we built for this. Exactly what you're saying, Hannah. We built for this. It's taken care of. You don't even have to worry about it, right? Because when you get an indication that it has indeed risen, it's going to bump you up, but it's going to strategically do it in that specialty phase. So like exactly what Ivy and Hannah just said, that's what we built for you, Nick. You don't have to worry about it. When you get to the specialty phase, it's all taken care of. So then you do get that time and zone, but then you aren't also just spinning around at tempo when you really should be at threshold. It's going to take care of all that for you. So let's say you enter that specialty phase and your FTP is just way too low or something, and you're in that situation like Hannah's talking about, it's not going to hesitate to turn your FTP up at that point as well. So it's intelligent. It's not like this is the difference between AI FTP detection and then every other app's existence of like you just did a 20-minute effort. Here's your new FTP. This is not looking for 20-minute efforts. It knows it can separate signal from noise. It understands it. It's such a huge scale because it's an actual model that's being trained here and that's doing this instead of just an algorithm that's looking for basic 20-minute efforts and then saying that, yes, it indeed has gone up. It's why you'd want to use AIFP. I mean, honestly, every athlete is going to need something like this in the future, I think, because it's going to make your training more and more accurate. And it doesn't just take into account your indoor rides. Sorry, sales pitch done, but if you aren't using it, like you're seriously missing out. Okay, so next question says, my training goals are geared toward 3 to 4 time trials and being into the A group on our club rides. Instead of an A race to peak for, I would rather plateau from May to August. Yikes. Even if I never reach a true peak. If that is theoretically possible, how would I adjust my training? Should I enter all events as B or C events?
My dude, that's a 4-month plateau.
Yeah. It's a long plateau.
Yeah.
And this is something that I want to say a few things on Hannah in particular. I want to get because you just had a race season that lasted like 9 months. Heck, it's still going. You're going to La Ruta. So I want to get your perspective on this. The best athletes in the world still pick and choose. The World Cup season was also very long this year. And you heard athletes like Luca Schwarzbauer, Alessandra Keller, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, Luana Lecomte, all like top performing athletes all say, I'm expecting to do really well now. And then at the end of the season or at different points in the season, they're saying, yeah, I'm not expecting to do well right now. And it's because if you plateau and your goal is just to like never peak, in fact, something really fun. I remember a coaching service called Never Peak. It was actually called that. It was a terrible name for a coaching service, but maybe they were thinking along these lines.
Like I get where they're going with it, but
yeah, but bad. Yeah. But with this in mind, if you just plateau, you never get to the point where you're truly like pushing your body's abilities and limits to the point where you are getting unique adaptation that then will allow you to perhaps scale an even higher peak next time. It's just kind of blunting the effects and keeping you handicapped, so to speak. So you never actually reach the full potential. In a situation like this, where you have a lot of races to go for, it's still very important to pick a point in the season that you want to perform your best. And then know that at those other points in the season, you may have great performances, but you won't count on having that great performance. Instead, you'll count on having that great performance when you have selected that A event. And you understand that 4 to 6 weeks On either end of that, you're going to be performing well. And after that, you can expect your performance to start to drop off. And that is typical and that is normal. Even though athletes are doing Grand Prix style stuff, that's what it is. Hannah, I assume that you still had a point in the season where you were performing best and you knew that at other points you wouldn't be performing best? Or did you just think that at every Lifetime Grand Prix event you would perform equally perfectly? What was your perspective?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I need to stretch out to answer this question because I'm so passionate about this. I second everything that Jonathan just said. I think that this is a larger problem than most people are willing to admit because I think a lot of people do this inadvertently. At least they are addressing this head on. So the first thing is you still need to establish a place where you want to peak. I think a huge misconception is that if you're not peaking, you're doing bad. And that's not the case at all. I mean, we talked at the start of this podcast about how expensive it is to travel to events. You're not traveling to an event knowing that you're going to do bad. You're still traveling to the event hoping for the best possible result and putting your best foot forward. And still, it just means that it's not the absolute best that you will be all year. So when you pick a peak, that's exactly what that is. That's saying this is the best that I hope to be all season long. Peaks are exciting rather than everything other than the peak being negative. I think that if you don't allow yourself to peak, you are just selling yourself short. So I actually have a term that I use for athletes who like to do this because you can do it. You absolutely can do this. It's possibly easier to do this than it is to peak because peaking takes a very strategic approach. So I call this approach a perma-fit athlete. You're just always fit, but you're never the best you can be. And so you're
Decently
actually
fit.
you're just completely selling yourself short. You are never reaching your full potential. But you feel really confident because on any given day, you pretty much know exactly what you're going to be because that's what you always are. This isn't the case to everyone, but I think a lot of people fall into this actually due to potentially a lack of confidence because it's scary to put all your eggs in one basket and it's also scary to let go. And so when you have the confidence to say, this is my A event, I'm pushing the chips to the middle of the table because I want to be the best I can be. That's when you have those performances where you realize, wow, I had no idea I'm capable of that. And then on the flip side, the only way to achieve that is to back off the volume, to let yourself recover. And I think people get really scared of that because they see that peak and they say, oh my gosh, I'm capable of this. I want to always be capable of this. And then they continue that volume, they continue that intensity. And guess what happens? That peak just declines anyways. And so you're no longer in charge of your fate because you're just slowly declining rather than intentionally rising and then intentionally falling. So I think for this athlete, what I would encourage is to pick a peak. If you truly have no feeling as to what's more important than the other, just pick a peak in the middle and then you'll rise to that peak and then you'll fall a little bit after. And both sides will still be good, but you'll have an excellent moment at the top. And I think that is definitely worth it.
Yes. And in terms of how to do this, Plan Builder takes care of this for you. It will not allow you to put 2 A events closer than 8 weeks together. That doesn't mean that you can't perform really well at multiple events within that time frame, just like Hannah said. It's just it wants you to pick a point, and then it doesn't want you to set your expectations to be able to repeat something like that until 8 weeks have passed. And what it will do, let's say that you have 2 events and they're 8 weeks apart. It's going to bring you up and you're going to be able to perform well, like high expectations for peak performance. After that, it's going to drop you down right after that peak in terms of your training load. It's going to put you into a pattern of recovery. And then it's going to likely, and depending on your experience level and everything else and what works for you as an athlete, it might give you a bit of base. And then from the base, it'll know that you're not going to lose a whole lot of that sharp fitness, and it'll bring you back in, give you a little bit of sharpness before. Or it might look at you and know that because of your training history, maybe you need to go back into a build phase after you rest to get a little bit more for that second peak. It's all intelligent and it handles all this for you. And I would recommend you should pick an A event, and then your rest of your events should be B or C events. And I do a lot of C events. I don't have that many B events, and I have 1 to 2 A events. That's it. So for me right now, for my training plan next year, Downeyville is my A event. And then I think I just have a bunch of C events as of now. I don't know what the B events will be. A B event is going to be something that's really close to what I'm going to be doing. And then I'll mark that as a B event. And then what Plan Builder will do is it'll give me like a taper day, like an openers workout the day before, and it'll adjust for that. And then after that, the next race that I would do is Park City point to point. And guess what? It's 7 weeks apart, not 8 weeks apart. And my goal will be Downeyville. And I know going into Park City point to point that I'm not going to expect the Downeyville level performance. That's what I'm expecting there. And going into Park City point to point, I'm just going to come in with what I have, and that's going to be okay. So you have to temper expectations. And that's not just because of the constraints of Plan Builder. It's because of the constraints of you as a human. It's super unfair to our bodies to put this expectation that like, well, my road race season goes from May all the way through to September. So I need to perform well at every single one. Your body can't do that. And performing well into your potential requires planning and infrastructure around that to be able to allow that to happen. So yeah, that's what I would recommend there on that part. Ivy, I'm sure you've shown up to cross races with long cross seasons and stuff and just know that like, I'm not expecting to light the world on fire.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of my confidence and how I feel about myself, every race kind of feels that way.
But there are times I'm sure when
Mhm.
you've shown up when it doesn't feel where you're expecting something big and you do get something big out of it, right?
Yeah, totally. It's just unrealistic to expect to knock everything out of the park all season long. And maybe because of my lack of confidence, like I fell into that because I couldn't correlate my fitness with what I expected from a result and was just always hoping so much that it did make me feel like I was always trying to knock it out of the park. Or like in terms of fitness, like I always felt like, oh, I must be close or I must be there and like I must still be at my like peak right now. And because I hoped for a result for such a long season, I did feel that way about the whole season. Be like, maybe I'm peaking right now. Maybe I'm peaking right now. I think I'm peaking right now. It's tough. That's tricky.
What would you tell yourself now? Going back and you were able to tell your younger self in those moments when you were just hoping that it was going to be peak performance and not knowing, what would you tell yourself with the benefit of hindsight?
I would have looked at my preparation more carefully and confidently. I mean, there were seasons when I was like very first racing that I didn't have a lot of structured training and I was just kind of winging it and hoping for the best. But then like once I started structured training, I would have looked more critically at like what's happening here? Why am I doing this? And what is this setting me up for? So that I had better expectations going into each race because I didn't. And when I was just kind of like checking boxes and just being like, okay, this is my workout, cool. And there was no dialogue about where I should be as a result and what purpose it was serving. How could I have realistic expectations for my fitness,
Yeah, really well said. You brought up the mental aspect of peaking, Hannah, and I think that that's a whole separate thing and it's quite complex, but there is an art to managing your expectations actively, being very intentional about setting expectations based on your training coming into this. That has to be so hard though when you have lifetime Grand Prix style stuff where it's like you don't have a throwout race. Things could happen and
You can sabotage yourself too if you tell yourself that it's okay right now. I'm on this downswing. I'm not peaking right now. I'm just sloping down before I build up again. Like, how do you not write yourself off for potential results in that race? What if you feel amazing that day, but burning in the back of your mind, you're like, well, I'm on this downslope. I'm not peaking right now. So this one's not super important. How do you navigate that?
Man, I almost don't even know what angle to come at this from. The first step is to figure out which way your mind is leaning in that day, because I think it goes both ways. You can underestimate what you're capable of and overestimate what you're capable of, and both are very harmful. And I think being really honest with yourself about which angle you're approaching that race from is probably the first thing. I think it's really important to have a realistic expectation, because if you're overestimating what you're capable of and you're thinking, I can win this race, and then you find yourself in 15th, man, that's so devastating. And maybe you'll end up 15th when you could have been 5th. But because you were expecting to be first, you just crumble. And maybe, like Ivy's saying, maybe you have the legs to be first that day, but you're so hesitant that you never make the move. So while you could have been first, you end up 5th. And both of those situations are a bummer. I think that one of the biggest things that I've found mentally is to have expectations, effort, and ability all on the same page. I don't know if you've ever experienced the concept of thinking something will be easy, maybe a workout. Hey, this is going to be easy. And then it's harder than you expect. And now it's exponentially harder than you
Yes.
expect. That is the worst. I think it's so much better to approach those negative thoughts before the event than during it. I think a lot of people become afraid in their preparation of those negative thoughts because they experience the negative thought, push it away, push it away, push it away, because as a society, we're taught to do that. But it's so much better to tackle that negative thought head on. And sometimes it's not even negative. Like when I go into a race like Leadville, yeah, I have the thought, this is going to be really hard. That's not a negative thought. That's a reality. And it's so much better that I approach that emotion before the race than in the middle of it.
Fantastic insight, Hannah and Ivy. Thank you, Ivy, for also being willing to share that stuff.
I was just thinking to Hannah, like negative thought versus reality. Like reality saying, this is a hard race. This is going to be hard. Negative thought is like, this is not within the scope of my abilities. I'm not good enough right now or in my fitness to get a result here.
Yeah, because this is hard, I suck.
Yeah.
Because this is hard, this is an indication that I'm not good enough.
It would be less hard or it's not hard for this person because they and I didn't. Those are the negative thoughts that are just not helpful.
Yeah, and this is a key part. We've talked about visualization before on the podcast, but visualization is commonly stated as the intent of it is to imagine the perfect performance and to do it so much so that way when you execute on race day, it's perfect. But I would argue that the best utility of visualization is to allow yourself to go through all eventualities that you could encounter and then understand how you will react in those moments beforehand. So it's predetermined so that the decisions can be made without emotion and you can separate that from it in those moments, just like Hannah said. I want to talk about approaching things with curiosity. We've talked about that term very often on this podcast. And I think that there's a difference. There's perhaps a danger in approaching something with unbridled hope that is not grounded in experience or what's led into that race. What I mean by that is if you just show up to the line, you're like, man, I've had absolutely terrible performance, but I'm going to approach this race with curiosity. Let's see how it goes. And that is a good spot. But if hidden within that, you are saying, I could win, but you really don't have any chance at winning, if it's not grounded in reality, it can pull you far away and have a disillusional effect on you as saying, I'm going to go and win. So I think that it's good to approach things with curiosity, but though that curiosity still has to be grounded within the realms of reality based on what you've done leading into it. And if you don't do that, you can feel like I'm doing the right thing. I'm approaching things with curiosity, but I'm still upset and not satisfied with racing. And I think that you do have to give yourself the space to be able to execute on a spectrum, but it has to be the result of what you've done recently. It can't just be all fluffy clouds.
Well, and you can expect from adrenaline, I think they say like 2 to 3% increase on race day. That's not guaranteed, but you can have that. And so I think there does have to be enough curiosity that you allow yourself to unleash that new level of performance. But just as Jonathan's saying, if you pick a random number, oh, my FTP is 200, but I wonder how long I can hold 250 watts today. Like, no, that's not the curiosity that we're talking about. I've shared this story on the podcast before, but I think in this context, it makes sense is when I was winning at Leadville and it was mile 70, the concept of performing at that level for the next 35 miles was really scary and overwhelming. And so I broke it down to, I wonder how I'll feel 5 miles from now. And that curiosity to see how it felt 5 miles really drove me forward because it separated into these small chunks rather than biting off the whole thing that did seem overwhelming. I think that's a type of curiosity that you can have, something that's bite-sized and drives you forward rather than a really large curiosity of, I wonder if I can win. You could say, I wonder how long I can stay in the lead group. Something more approachable like that. It's the curiosity is more of a process or performance goal rather than an outcome goal.
Yeah. You might be listening to this and think, okay, so I should just go in with no expectations and think that I'm going to be mid for the whole race until I get to my peak. What I find the best athletes do is that they set other goals that they aim to accomplish with their C and B events. So they aren't looking at the results, and that isn't the focus. And particularly, most of us listening to this are not in the Lifetime Grand Prix. We're not in some sort of series that's paying us money and that's our livelihood, right? So keep this in mind. It might be best for us to go into whatever that race is, and you're going to be like, I'm going to really nail my nutrition today. That's going to be my goal with this C or B race. Or I'm going to really work on my pedal stroke and make sure that that is really just smooth throughout the whole race, if that's something that you've been working on and struggling with. You could have something that's just, I'm really going to work on staying present and focused on the effort. I'm going to work on pacing. There's so many aspects of execution, but using your C and B events to focus on an aspect of your execution. So then that way, perhaps it becomes habitual on the day that matters. That's how I see these C and B races most productively being used. It's when there's another outcome or another process that you're trying to figure out how to unlock and put into place. And if you can do that, that makes it so that you almost have a distraction from this temptation that exists within all of us to turn our B and C events into an A event emotionally. Even though it's written down as a B or a C on our calendar, we show up and we just get lost in the emotion of it, and suddenly it becomes an A event. And then when our performance doesn't match that, we get devastated, like Hannah said. And then that gets really tough to come back from.
Why are
And
you
typically it's
quoting
hard
me,
to come
Jonathan? Why are you doing that?
back. Sorry.
Gosh.
Sorry. And typically the most damaging part of that perhaps isn't even in the moment when we become disillusioned with the result or the outcome, but instead it's how we react to that. Because very often what our reaction then is like, got to train more, like I got to do more, or I got to do less of something and I got to do more of this. And we kind of take these drastic measures because we feel like we just had a huge decoupling from our expectation. And this is why you see a lot of athletes not stay the course on the path to their A event because they didn't have their expectations set. They then overreact and change something dramatic. It's like, all right, I've been taking 2 rest days a week. Clearly the answer here is to take 1 rest day a week and to fill that in to train more. I need to do more, like the most common one. I guess I just need more Z2. Like it's the giant Band-Aid that a lot of us put on things, right?
Dude, or to spiral and overreact and be like, I'm not cut out for this. I'm a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. Like this is not working. I should try another discipline. I should stop racing, or I should stop going to races, or, there are many different pathways of those overreactions when you don't align your expectations accordingly.
Yeah.
And I've been through them all.
Ivy, that's why you're so good on the podcast. You have the experience and you're willing to share it. I mean, our goal is to make you faster. And our goal as well at TrainerRoad is we want you to enjoy and love the sport that you're doing too. And the ability to succeed in that sport, whatever relative success is. So I think that this peaking part, a lot of it's emotional. I'm really glad you brought that up, Hannah. I think that's a key part to it. Anything else to add before we go on to Keaton's question? All right. Keaton says, hey, TrainerRoad team, forgive me if this has been covered in a previous episode, but do hard efforts at the beginning of a race or fast group ride affect gut performance? And do high heart rate and or lactate levels affect the gut's ability to absorb carbs? If so, what is a typical recovery time for a gut to return to baseline following these efforts? And then there's kind of some assumptions handed out by Keaton. Are working muscles prioritized for blood flow over gut function? If so, does this mean that carb intake and distribution are limited during these efforts? Is there a, quote, sweet spot for gut function similar to power zone? Thanks for taking the time to think it over. I have thoughts on this one, but Hannah or Ivy, with all the cross racing that you've done, I don't know if you've experienced this.
This feels a little in line with that assumption that I might mess this up. I feel like, Jonathan, we were talking about this the other day and like trying to look into research about this. We were talking about specifically not fueling for endurance rides or fueling less for endurance rides and how much more or less your body needs based upon the intensity of the workout or activity.
Yeah, like the substrate utilization, like
right.
You think like endurance, I'm burning more fat, less carbohydrate, therefore I should take in less. And
exactly.
Then as the intensity goes up, you think I'm using more carbohydrate, then less fat. Yeah, the temptation is to try to really get down into the weeds and micro adjust.
And I think what we found or what didn't find based upon scientific research and in studies that are available is that it's so individual and it's almost impossible to discern in a broadly applicable way. You burn less in this zone than you do in this zone, or your body uses this much of this in this zone and that much of this in this zone. I think that's kind of what maybe the root of Keaton's question
perhaps
is, that like your body is using it. Am I misunderstanding or reading that wrong?
That's like an avenue to go down with it, I think. But I think the main part is just like, do these super hard efforts make it so that I can't absorb food later on at the beginning of something, Hannah?
I think that they're not completely off. Yes, when you are exercising, that is true that blood flow is diverted from the gut in order to prioritize performance. But to me, this is interesting. And
Mm,
that's kind of where that process ends. When it comes to going down this path, I think the best angle that could actually benefit you would be what Ivy's talking about is depending on what type of races you're doing, you can manipulate or work on, maybe is a better word, your metabolic efficiency, which is something you can do in training. But when it comes to racing, I think that fueling stays pretty much the same because there is no situation in which I start a race and go, oh, this was a little harder than I intended, therefore I'm going to change my fueling strategy. No. When I start a race, my fueling strategy is my fueling strategy, and I'm going to stick to that essentially no matter what. The only thing is I might add on if there's something that changes, like it's really cold and therefore I need more calories. But there's no situation in which I delete calories or carbs from my plan. And so, yeah, I would not personally be looking at it thinking, okay, we started hard. Now I'm going to hit this recovery time until I can have my gel. No, I'm
mhm.
just going to stick with the plan and understand that ideally I've trained my gut to be able to handle that in any and all circumstances.
Yeah. Reading between the lines here, like Keaton is asking, what is a typical recovery time for a gut to return to baseline following an effort? When reading that, I think Keaton is just asking about gut distress. And I think
Yes.
instead of focusing on like, how do I feel if there's a really hard start? How do I do this? How do heart rate and this and that affect my gut? I think instead of focusing on like the effort and how to fuel for the effort, like if you have gut distress, let's figure out why you have gut distress because that's not normal. That should be
Yeah.
what you're trying to figure out instead of figuring out the correlation between fueling and effort in terms of gut distress. Figure out why there's gut distress because your
Typically,
glucose. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, typically in a race, like you have your plan, just like Hannah said, and you stick to your plan, but you don't get to fuel perfectly every 15 minutes when that beep goes off because it might be chaotic for a little bit, right? So you'll see athletes make hay when the sun shines, meaning that when there's an opportunity to feed, they might take on a little bit more because they weren't able to take it on just before that, or they know that coming up it's going to be hard and they might not be able to take it in. But regardless, they're still sticking to a plan. Yes, blood is diverted from the guts outward toward the muscles, and the muscles are going to be working. You also have like spikes in hormones like adrenaline and cortisol and all those things. And yes, all of those things do send signals that will slow digestion. All of that could be happening, and it certainly could be affecting your ability to process a certain amount at a certain time. I would say that this isn't like the context of a hard start. Okay. So this is like maybe the race is just so hard for so long and it's above your level. You're punching above your weight. There's a lot of reasons why your performance might suffer in those moments. But if you're just like, it's super hard, I'm just going to keep intaking this max amount of carbohydrate and doing all I can. Yeah, you might have some gut distress because you're just pushing so hard that you're not able to take it in. But that may not be the case across the board. I would be really surprised, Keaton, if in this case, like Ivy said, you have another reason that's causing your gut distress. Whether it's you're taking in too much leading into the race and you eat a big breakfast and maybe it's too close to the start of that race, or you eat a lot of food beforehand and it's too close, and then you start taking in a bunch of carbs and you do your warm up. Or it could be on the other side of things too, where maybe you're not taking in enough coming into it. But that's where my assumption would be. Just a hard start to a race isn't likely to set your gut up so that it's just like can't absorb anything. I've looked into research this week, Keaton, on this question in terms of trying to find some sort of return to baseline after this. There is no defined timeline that I can find amongst the research and amongst different people that are educated on the matter, proposing what might happen. Nobody's throwing out like it takes 5 minutes, it takes X amount of time. The big thing that you'll notice is that the commonality across successful athletes is that they have a nutrition plan and they stick to it, like Hannah said. And this is something that they've tried and tweaked and adjusted through training so that on race day, it's nothing novel. So test this out, Keaton, in your training. Like go through and see, are you taking in exactly the same amount of nutrition in the same schedule on race day that you are in your training? If not, then you want to remedy that. You want to make sure that you are replicating that sort of thing. So then that way you show up and it's something that you can count on.
Wait, maybe Keaton's fueling perfectly and just gets mad nervous for
Totally.
races
Bubble
and
guts.
race rides. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very possible. So make yourself nervous, put yourself in situations and try nutrition and try to figure it out then. Too often everybody tries something fresh on race day. Do we have time for one more question, Hannah? Is that good?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, awesome. Looking at the list, let's go to Blake's question because I bet this one's going to be relatable to a lot of people. And then if we do have time, we might squeeze in one more. I mainly ride road, but I do like to dabble in off-road with my cross-country mountain bike. I found that I get numb on the outside of my hand between the wrist and the little finger. I cut my handlebars shorter, now 720 millimeters wide, but this did not help, and it did not allow me to fit more easily down single track trails. I'm pretty short at around 5'6" and with average arm length and average shoulder width. I do love cross-discipline training and the exploration side of off-road, but the numb hands after 20 or so minutes really puts me off. Do you have any tips with gloves, grips, etc. to allow me to ride longer off-road? I love the podcast and all the hard work you guys do. Can't wait for AIFTP for outdoor progression. So AIFTP detection already works for your outdoor rides. So it looks at what you're doing when you're outside. At first, we require 10 rides, so then we can calibrate you and have a set that our models can use to be able to understand you as an athlete. After that, you just do your outside rides and it would still figure it out. It's pretty cool. So, okay, Hannah, what do you say? You're bouncing around between flat and drop bars.
Yeah, I have a lot of suggestions for this, especially with my athletic training background. So this is called ulnar nerve palsy. It's very common. It's so common that sometimes colloquially it's referred to as cyclist palsy. And it's from compression of the ulnar nerve, usually on the handlebars. So the ulnar nerve, it has a place where it is exposed and sensitive at the tunnel of Guyon, which is in the palm.
Totally sounds like it's something from
Lord of the Rings
by the
stuff.
way.
Yeah, exactly.
The tunnel of Guyon. Sauron's there. Throws a staff down.
Yeah, it's on the palm, close to the wrist, on the pinky side. So if you're watching, it's like in this location, which is a place where we put a lot of pressure on the bars. And it is often extra exposed on flat bars because our wrists tend to be really cocked and bent. So that's the first thing, is if you notice that your wrists are especially bent on your mountain bike or your drop bars, that would be the very first thing to fix. So that could be rotating your bars to try and find a more straightened wrist position so that
what do you mean by that, by
isn't
rotating?
so exposed.
That's a super key point that I think a lot of people don't realize, that you can rotate your bars.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if your wrists are really bent backwards, you actually want to rotate your bar potentially forward to flatten it out. That would be how you would want to rotate
So from
it.
the side profile, your brake levers, instead of being more level, parallel with the ground, then to do what Hannah's describing, the brake levels would be pointed more towards the ground, and that would rotate your wrist forward a little bit.
Possibly, but then on top of that, Hannah, when you rotate your handlebars, they have a shape to them. So then when you rotate the handlebar and the clamp, that's going to change the angle at which your hands will rest. No matter where your hands are sitting, rolled forward or back, suddenly your handlebar goes from, let's just say, really flat and not sweeping back to you. And now since you've rotated it, the bars sweep back to you slightly. They may curve up slightly, or vice versa. It just allows that sort of change.
So that is why that can be a complicated thing to explain across the board, because it does depend what bar you have. That said, that's also why if this is something you struggle with, you are recommended to have a flat bar. So that's another thing that you can do, is get a flat bar if you don't have one. Also, the most easy thing you can do is shift your hand position regularly. So on the drop bars, hoods to drops, just moving around to change where the pressure is frequently. And then another interesting thing is actually going back and looking at your saddle. So if your saddle position is tilted nose down, you're sliding further towards the handlebars potentially and putting even more weight on those hands. So you want to flatten out your saddle so that you're not sliding down. Ideally, one of those things work because you don't want to go starting to change your fit a lot. But if still this is impacting your ability to enjoy the bike because of the discomfort, you want to get as much weight off of your hands as possible. So you're going to start looking at things like putting spacers under your bars to raise them up closer to you, shortening your stem to move it back towards you so that you're shifting your weight backwards off of your hands and making that a more comfortable situation for yourself.
Yeah, and somebody's going to mention gel gloves or different grips.
Yep,
And
of
yes, you
course.
can do that. I find in most cases, unless your grips are really worn out, that's probably a Band-Aid that's going to sit between you and whatever the real situation is. I have found that every year, if I start riding my road bike a bunch, it takes a little while for me to adapt to it, and I'll experience numbness for a while, then it goes away and I get used to it. And then if I start riding the mountain bike more, I might experience something like that. But you really do have to play around with this rotating your handlebars within the clamp, within the stem clamp, and finding the right position. Just because it came a certain way from the factory does not mean it's right. Also, a lot of handlebars will have hash marks and it will be clear where the middle hash mark is. That does not mean that that is where your handlebars should be. They have those hash marks so that you can rotate them to find the ideal and comfortable position. I have the MV M5 bar, and mine is rotated 2 hash marks forward from whatever the center hash mark is, if that's a point of relevance for anybody. It's 2 hash marks forward, I'm rotated, and that makes it so that my handlebars slightly come up a little bit more, and actually they don't sweep back quite as much. And then that makes it so that it's more comfortable for my hands. The huge difference getting a carbon fiber handlebar versus an aluminum handlebar can transfer a whole lot less vibration, but not all carbon bars are made the same. I feel like, for example, when I have the normal S-Works bar on my Epic, it feels kind of like a leaf spring. It's like kind of like bouncy. Whereas the NV M5 bar that I really love, that one feels really damped and it's not bouncing back and giving me any sort of energy coming back. So yeah, really good tips, Hannah. It's good stuff. If you struggle with hand numbness, can you let us know down below? Because that's probably frustrating a lot of people right now. And if you let us know what works for you, that would be great. And also, if you're listening to this, watching this, go to YouTube right now. Even if you're just listening to this, go to YouTube, watch it there. And there's a bell and you can hit that bell. Only 4% of our subscribers, which is almost 100,000, which by the way, go subscribe if you haven't because we need to hit 100,000. But only 4% of you have hit that bell so that you get notified when we publish new things. So go and hit the bell. Okay, can we do one more?
One more, let's do it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Let's do Will's question. Will says, having compared TrainerRoad to other training options provided by other platforms and private coaches, TrainerRoad plans have very little time and endurance zones. Why have the build and specialty plans been designed with so much intensity and such little time and endurance zones when many of us know endurance training is highly beneficial to aerobic performance? Will, I'm glad you wrote this in. We're going to bust a myth right now. So
I want the Mythbusters debunked stamp on the
kaboom. Right now, you'll be able to see on screen, YouTube, they can click the link here, but Rob in post, our editor, will add this in. I just have a basic spreadsheet that breaks down the plans that you talked about there. So I took a build plan and a specialty plan, but it's similar for all of them. So I looked at low volume, mid volume, and high volume. So general build low volume, 0 endurance days, and 3 other days. Why might that be, Hannah? If you're just training 3 times a week at low volume, why would you not have any endurance days potentially in there? Why do you think?
Yeah, the less time that you have to train, the more intensity you need because the only way to improve is through novel stimulus. And so if you only have, let's say, 3 hours to train in the week, if you're just doing aerobic rides all the time, you're very, very quickly going to cap out that novel stimulus. It'll become easy for your body and you'll stop improving. And so if you only have a small amount of time, you absolutely have to, quote unquote, make the most of it by putting intensity in.
Yep. Now, the master's version of that plan gives you 1 endurance day in between 2 intense days. So we're talking about training 3 hours a week here. So that's not a lot of training time that you would be dedicating to it. This is why a lot of people choose to just do the low volume plan, then add in whatever sort of riding they want to do on top of that. Just beware with that. If you're doing a bunch of like online races and hard group rides and races on top of that, you're doing 3 days of intensity that are prescribed, and then you're also doing 3 more days of intensity. So that's a really tough way to do it. So you have to keep that in mind. All right, mid-volume, 2 days of endurance and 3 days of intensity, unless you do the master's plan, which in case you get 3 endurance days and only 2 days of something other than that endurance stuff. Once you get into high volume, the normal plan has 3 days of endurance and 3 days of non-endurance. And then you do the master's plan and it has 4 days of endurance and 2 days of non-endurance. So you can see it's a myth, man. It's not real. Like, just look at the plans. We do not have some sort of dearth of endurance.
You don't have to sign up for TrainerRoad too to go,
can check them
look
out.
at Plan Builder and check out and put an event in even and see what the plan would be like. You don't have to sign up for TrainerRoad to do that. So go check it out.
Exactly. Then rolling road race, if you look at that, it's the same. But on the endurance days for low volume, halfway through that specialty phase, we start to give you an endurance day to make it so that you're not incurring as much stress. And then once you get into the taper anyway, which is going to be the final 2 to 3 weeks of your plan, it's going to reduce the amount of intense days that you have, and it's going to reduce the amount of intensity you're doing. So across the board, you're good. It's not like it lacks endurance. So you can see it
debunked.
on the spreadsheet. Yeah, debunked. That's taken care of. And we have one last question from Taylor too. Actually, I'm going to read this. It's really funny. She says, I've listened to the podcast religiously for the past 3 years, and it has answered all of my questions, and I've had many more than I never knew I had. I finally decided to stop paying for a coach and use TrainerRoad because I feel like I'm not getting enough value from a coach anymore. You're my motivators, educators, and as weird as it seems, you're even like my accountability partners. I know that's weird since you don't know me, but I very much appreciate the relationship you don't know about. So thanks, Taylor. Stoked we can help with that. And Taylor says, my biggest concern with signing up for TrainerRoad is that it won't be exciting enough to keep my attention. What do you all say about this when it gets brought up? Any tips? I get asked this quite a lot. And we intentionally design it so that you can BYOE, bring your own entertainment. That's why if you use it on a computer, you can pin it down to the bottom of the screen and you can watch Netflix or bike races.
Yeah. I think the tough reality too is that if you're an athlete or a cyclist that's prioritizing incorporating entertainment with training in the form of something like online racing, you are leaving a lot of gains on the table. You're sacrificing the really truly structured element that will get you faster if entertainment is something that you have to do with training.
Well, entertainment on the side of like, yeah, if it's racing, that's not going to let you do structure. But if you're just using online virtual world platform, you're just doing something like that, that's cool. We designed it so that you can do that. So then you can ride around in that world and you can still have your smart trainer control everything for you. We have had lots of discussions, prototypes built, like alphas built, even like darn near close beta sort of stuff where we've tested out a lot of different entertainment options, but we know that you know how you like to be entertained best. So we leave it up to you.
Yeah.
Because that
you don't have
entertainment
to
piece is super important.
You don't have to just stare at the cubes.
Yeah.
Well,
we don't
also,
want that.
am I the only one who thinks the intervals are actually way more entertaining? I mean, aerobic riding, don't get me wrong, aerobic riding is fun, but sometimes you'll do an interval workout, or at least I'll do an interval workout, and you get so immersed in these intervals that when you come out of it, you're like, what is time? Like,
yeah.
You know what I
Crazy,
mean?
right?
Like, it just kind of dissipates.
Yeah. We've designed it so that you can listen to music, listen to podcasts, watch movies, watch shows, watch races, use online virtual world platforms, do whatever you want to do. Play Xbox. That's why everybody should put like, aero bars on their bikes and you can hold a controller and play that. I don't know. Like, we don't want to make it so that you can't use any of those things by building in something that's like, this is how you will be entertained. So please, Taylor, bring everything because that's what it's designed to do. We take care of the structure and making you faster, and then you bring in all the entertainment that you want. That's like the whole point of it. So it's not at odds with any of that stuff. Rather, it's a complement. It works really well together.
Jonathan, we should make like SoundCloud mixes or something.
Shout out actually to John O'Grant from Above and Beyond, which I had a total fanboy moment when I saw that he did TrainerRoad rides. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I don't know if anybody knows Above and Beyond, but amazing electronic music, like really good. He's involved like in Juna Deep and a lot of other cool stuff. And I have thought about this actually of having Jono like build out playlists or like just sharing like live sets. Like how rad would that be? And once again, this wouldn't be like built into the products, just like suggested because you know how you want to be entertained with. You might want to listen to Pink Floyd or Vivaldi. I don't know. Like, we don't tell you what to listen to, but yeah, I agree. It'd be really fun, right? It'd be really good stuff. So yeah, bring your own entertainment, Taylor. It's made for that. This part will just make you faster so you don't have to worry about that. It's the good part. Hannah, good luck in Costa Rica. I'm so excited for you.
Yeah. And enjoy your rest week afterwards. That's so sick.
Thank you.
It's
Yeah, it's going to be super fun. I can't wait to share all about it on the podcast.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Ivy, thanks for joining us. This is fantastic. Everybody that's listening, if you appreciated this podcast episode, the best way you can show your gratitude is by rating it and sharing it with your friends. Please do that. Leave comments on YouTube. Hit that bell when you subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. All that stuff. That's how you can help us. And of course, if you haven't yet signed up for TrainerRoad, you're missing out. People in over 150 countries are doing it every day. So go do it. It'll make you faster. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.